Hello and welcome to Evo India, and say hello to the all-new KTM 390 Adventure. Now this ground-up new motorcycle is arguably one of the most anticipated motorcycles in our Indian two-wheeler industry for 2025. And with this bike, KTM hopes to reset the benchmark of what a very capable tourer and an off-road machine, basically an ADV, should be able to do. Have KTM managed to achieve that? That's exactly what I'm going to be finding out in this video. But before we proceed, don't forget to like this video, share it with like-minded enthusiasts, and smash that bell icon to stay notified for all of our video drops.
Never little wanna be gangster trying to play hard. Damn down, they just think they are.
Now let's start with the design of this motorcycle because there's a lot to unpack over here. Now the previous gen KTM 390 Adventure, it took design inspiration from KTM's bigger touring machines. But as you can very clearly see over here, the inspiration is from the KTM Dakar motorcycles, the 450 Dakar rally bike. And that design has translated really well for this machine. It looks a lot leaner than before, it's taller, it's a lot more aggressive. As you can see, there's a very narrow tail section, and this whole front end, it looks like a proper Dakar motorcycle. When you're sat on the motorcycle, you have this new 5-inch TFT screen, and it's placed in a rally tower sort of orientation, and you also have all the other cladding and panels on the side that make you feel that way. Now if you look at the front, you have this headlight that's inspired from KTM's bigger motorcycles like the 1390 Super Adventure and so on and so forth. You also have this nice tall fender over here, like a proper off-road style mudguard. You have this short fender over here, and KTM will sell you a slightly longer monsoon style fender so that you can keep muck and all away from you when you're riding. That will be available as an accessory. Then you have these nice lean mean panels all across the side, and one very interesting thing about these panels is that KTM says that this has a pigmentation process. So basically these aren't stickers, the entire design of this goes through and through the plastic. So if you were to crash and scratch the bodywork, you wouldn't really be seeing black or some other color. This same logo, the same graphic will continue till the entire thickness of the plastic piece. And KTM also promises that this plastic is a lot more durable than before. Now if you see this side, you have a nice knuckle guard setup over here. You have these nice mirror stalks, a nice and wide handlebar. The riding position is great, and that flows into a very well shaped fuel tank. Again, the previous generation was very bulbous. It had nice aggressive cuts that made it look more touring oriented than an off-road motorcycle. And the entire theme of this motorcycle is one that promotes that this is a very capable off-road machine now, and not a naked bike that's trying to add a little more character to its abilities. But this has been designed as an outright off-road machine, a proper adventure tourer in that regard, and the styling reflects exactly that. You have a nice single piece seat, again very rally-like, but it's very comfortable as well. It's not uncomfortable. The foot pegs are placed in a very neutral position. You're reaching out to a nice tall wide handlebar, and all in all, I really love the way this looks with the 21-inch front wheel with the spokes. And again, these are tubeless spoked wheels. So what do you think about the design of the KTM 390 Adventure? Do let me know in the comment section down below. But I for one really love the way it looks. Now before I tell you about what this motorcycle is like to ride, what the engine performance is like, and what the ride and handling package is like, let me walk you through what exactly is new on this motorcycle, because like I started this video off, this is a nearly ground up all new motorcycle. Now starting at the heart of the matter, the engine. Now this is the 399cc single cylinder liquid cooled engine, the LC4C that does duties in the 390 Duke. Now that has finally made its way to the Adventure 390, but it has been tuned a little to better suit an adventure bike's characteristics. Now to that end, you still have the same power and torque outputs. So this still does make 45.3 bhp at 8500 rpm and 39 newton meters of torque at 6500 rpm. But the sprocketing is different. Now the previous gen 390 Adventure, it had a 15-tooth front and a 45-tooth rear sprocket. This on the other hand has a 14-tooth front and a 46-tooth rear sprocket. So that should aid with low-end power and better tractability. And to that end, KTM has also tuned the engine such that it makes power 1000 RPM earlier than it does on the previous engine. So that should make this motorcycle a lot more friendly to ride while riding off-road. Slow speed off-roading should not be a problem, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Now, apart from that, coming to the chassis, this still does use a very similar front frame as the new and updated 390 Duke, but the rear subframe is a tubular steel unit rather than the aluminum unit that you find on the 390 Duke. The ergonomics are greatly different. Now, the previous Gen 390 Adventure had a big complaint that it was a very tall seat. It was roughly 855 mm. Now, KTM have worked really hard to make this bike a lot more accessible than before, and to that end, this has an 830 mm seat height, which is 25 mm less than the bike it replaces, and this is despite the ground clearance going up from 200 to 227 millimeters. Now, even when it comes to suspension, you get WP Apex upside down open cartridge forks at the front, and you get 30 clicks of rebound and compression damping adjustability at the front. Now, at the rear, you get a monoshock which is adjustable for 20 steps of rebound and 10 steps of preload. Now, in terms of the travel that you get, it is also more than before. You get 200 mm of travel at the front and 205 mm of travel at the rear. And the most obvious change is the wheel setup. Now, this gets a 21-inch front wheel and a 17-inch rear wheel, both running tubeless spoked wheels. Now, that is great. And in terms of the tires, you get Apollo Strampler XR tires. Now, the braking department has also seen a bit of an update over here. No longer do you get the radial 4-piston calipers. Instead, you get a twin piston caliper at the front mounting onto a 320 mm floating disc. And KTM also tells us that the brake pad is a sintered unit. At the rear, you get a 240 mm disc with a single piston unit. Now, let's talk about what this bike is like to ride. Okay, so now that you know what is different on this bike from the previous generation and how it's almost all new, let's talk about how this motorcycle rides. Let's start with the engine first. Now, this, like I said, is the 399cc engine from the Duke, which means, like the Duke, this has got a lot more low-end and mid-range than ever before. And in the case of this 390 Adventure, it also makes power 1000 RPM earlier than before, which means it's a lot more tractable, and especially when you're riding off-road, because off-roading is one of the biggest focuses with this motorcycle. You have a lot more grunt down low, which means slow speed stuff. You don't need to rev the bike all the way to get any power and get moving. You can really keep it in the lower band of the rev range, say below 5,000-6,000 RPM, and you still have enough grunt to get going, and that makes the bike so much more friendly than before. It also has one tooth less in the front sprocket and one tooth more in the rear sprocket than the previous Gen 390 Adventure, and that, with the new state of the tune of the engine, just makes things that much better. When you're riding off-road, small stones, rocks, sliding all around, for second gear, you're more than comfortable keeping it below 6,000 RPM and still having enough grunt. And the good thing is, when you want to pick up the pace, you have more than enough grunt in the top end as well. So this, after all, is a KTM, and it does have a lot of that power up high as well. Now, coming to the road manners of the motorcycle, this tractability makes it that much more easier to ride in the city as well. You're not constantly stalling the bike or any of that, and KTM have also introduced a crawl feature, which basically, in the lower gears, if you let off the clutch, the bike will just slowly move ahead without stalling. This is very similar to TVS's GTT glide through technology, and it works wonders when you're in chock-a-block start-stop traffic. Come to the highway, and 6th gear, between 6,000 and 7,000 RPM is where you're going to be cruising at if you want to do between 100 and 120 kmph, and the bike feels great over there. Now, bear in mind that the engine is a little buzzy, so you do feel a little revs, especially up to 3,000-4,000 RPM. You do feel quite a bit of buzz. Again, this is not aggressive, this is not really intrusive, but the engine makes itself seen. You do know that you're riding an internal combustion motorcycle, one with high compression and a lot of performance to offer. The second you cross 5,000-6,000 RPM, things start to smooth over, and at 100 kmph, you don't really feel much vibration, just a little buzzing on the foot peg is what I felt. And you get to around 110-115 kmph and things get a lot better, and at that point of time, the bike is very stable, very composed, and you're having a great time all in all. Now, in terms of the electronics this bike has to offer, you have a whole bunch of ride modes. You have 3 ride modes to be specific, and you have different throttle maps for each mode. So rain and street are softer, So rain is the softest with most traction control intervention. ABS is in its most aggressive setting, and in street things get a little better, but in off-road there is a separate throttle map which makes things that much more aggressive. Feels like a proper KTM when you're riding in off-road mode. Throttle response is a lot snappier than before. Yeah, it makes for a very good riding experience. And in the off-road mode you can also change the throttle maps to rain or street if you don't want the throttle response to be too aggressive. All the electronics, they work as advertised. And another inclusion on this bike, which is a segment first, is cruise control. Now you have 3 dedicated buttons on the left stitch cube to activate cruise control, and it's very straightforward, very easy to use, and it works very well. In the short time that I did get to ride the bike, I had a great time with it. KTM have done a very good job of making it a lot more accessible than before. You have more power, but at the same time you can use that power a lot better. Now coming to the ride and handling setup of the motorcycle, the second you swing your leg over, you realize you're on a very different bike as against the previous one. Firstly, you notice how short the saddle is. Now I'm not saying this is short, but it is 25 mm less than before, making it a lot more accessible to a whole wide range of riders. And that's not to say that because it's become shorter, it's become any more cramped, because if you see the foot pegs, they're placed under me, they're in a very neutral position, there's not much of a kink in my legs. It's a very comfortable place to be. And then when you reach out to this nice wide handlebar, it's a great touring setup. And at the same time when you want to stand up and ride, the riding position is suited perfectly for standing up and riding off-road as well. The only complaint I have for someone my size is I would like the handlebars to be a little taller, say an inch or two. This is something that you can easily fix with a set of handlebar raisers. Now coming to the rest of the chassis setup, the frame has been picked off of the new 390 Duke, but the rear subframe is bespoke to this motorcycle. It's a steel telly tube frame. It's not the aluminum frame that the 390 Duke has, and that has just made things that much nicer. Now in terms of ground clearance, you have 227 mm of ground clearance, which is 27 more than the 390 Adventure, and that is good because now this is a proper off-roader. It's not like the 390 Adventure, the first gen one, which felt like a naked bike on stilts. That felt more like an afterthought if you're really talking about off-roading with it. But this, it feels like off-roading has been at the core, at the center of the development process, and all of the components reflect just that. Now what this translates to on the road, you have a very inherently KTM type setup motorcycle. This is a little on the stiffer side, but you can always toggle around with the settings and get it to a setup that you like. But the inherent setup is that of a slightly stiffer bike, and this you will really appreciate when you start to pick up the pace, and that's when you really enjoy a bike like this. And coming off-road, the suspension works really well. Ruts, hard rocks, loose pack, sand, it handles everything in its stride. And a quick example of why the adjustability is great, I was doing some jumps earlier and I wanted it to land a little better. I just added a little compression damping and that worked for me. Now the thing about this is it's very easy to mess around and find the right setting. It's really easy to mess around and mess things up as well. So if you do get the motorcycle, I would suggest going to a suspension technician, understanding very well what everything does, and then going with it, because once you do, you will really enjoy the way this motorcycle rides. Now coming to the wheel setup, we have a 21-inch wheel at the front. Now finally you know that this is meant for off-roading because you have a 1990 section 21-inch front and you have a 130/80/17 wheel at the rear. Now they're shod in Apollo Strampler tires, and I've already said this before, the tires are very good. They have a very good dual purpose nature. They work well on the road and they work very well off-road as well. So I wouldn't envision anyone running out to buy new tires just because that is holding the bike back. Of course, once you start upping your skill and you're doing hardcore off-roading, you can always do with a set of more aggressive tires. But as it stands, the setup is great if you're looking at touring and riding off-road as well. Now coming to the braking, the brakes have changed a little from the previous model. You're still running 320 mm floating discs, but the caliper in the front is a twin piston axially mounted caliper. And what that means is that the braking is not as sharp as it used to be, and I completely understand why. Well, while I was on the road, I would have liked if there was a little more sharp response from the brakes, a little more aggression, but the second you come off-road, you quickly realize why KTM have gone this way with the braking setup, because as it is set right now, it's calibrated very well in a very balanced manner that you can enjoy the brakes both on-road and off-road. Now of course, if you're coming off the previous gen 390 Adventure or a 390 Duke, you cannot expect that kind of braking for this, and I completely understand why KTM have done that. Now in terms of electronics, this has also gotten a major overhaul. At the center stage, you have a new 5-inch color TFT display. This is the similar type that you find on the 390 Duke. So it has the bonded glass, which means better contrast and the less likelihood of it fogging up, something that was very common with the previous Gen 390 Adventure. Now in terms of electronics, this does get a ride-by-wire system. You get 3 riding modes. You get rain, street and off-road. Now each riding mode has a different throttle map, and the off-road mode, you can set up the throttle map the way you like. So if you want a softer throttle map, you can use either street or rain, and if you want a more aggressive, snappier throttle response, you can choose the off-road throttle response, and the throttle becomes really lively. In terms of rider safety aids, this gets a 3-axis IMU, which enables cornering ABS, cornering traction control, and apart from that, you also get a segment first cruise control system that works very well. Now the switch cube is predominantly the same as the 390 Duke, with the addition of a custom button. Basically that button you can map to whatever function you want from the settings, and the cruise control button. So you have one button to start cruise control, you have your plus, minus and set and resume functions, and the cruise control also works very well. Now KTM has also upgraded the quick shifter from the 390 Duke to make it a little more responsive, a little more friendly, and for the most part the quick shifter also works pretty well. Again, this is still called the KTM Quick Shifter Plus, and the best part is all of these settings you can toggle, switch off in most cases if you really don't like the way they're functioning. ABS can be switched off for the rear, traction control can be switched off altogether, and all of this can be done on the fly, and these switch cubes are very easy to use, and controlling these functions are also very intuitive. Now in terms of connectivity, you get the same features that you do on the 390 Duke with a few extras. Now what you can do on the new 390 Adventure is, unlike the previous gen bike or unlike the previous 390 Duke, where you could only answer and receive phone calls or cut phone calls or change your music, this can also interact with your phone to an end where your contacts and your recents and your favorites will be over here, so you can even place calls from here, and that is pretty interesting. Apart from that, you get your traditional turn-by-turn navigation and all of the other controls. So again, a very well-equipped motorcycle in terms of features. So if you want more analog disconnected experience, you can do that as well, but if you want something involving, you want something where the electronic rider aids are taking care of you, you have that as well. Right, now answering the very important question that I posed in the start of the video: have KTM done enough to scare its competition away, and have they set the benchmark of what a proper off-road oriented adventure tourer should be? In one word, yes, KTM have done a very good job with this motorcycle. It finally seems like it has a character, it has a sense of purpose of what the bike should be. Unlike the previous generation 390 Adventure, which was a little confused, it just seemed like a Duke on stilts that didn't really solve the ADV problem very well. This, on the other hand, is dedicated. It knows what it wants to be, and it does that very well. It's very good on the highways. The cruise control makes it very effective. It's very good off-road. It feels like it's been purpose built for that, but they haven't compromised on the touring comfort either. Now, credit where it's due, the previous 390 Adventure was a good touring machine. It had all the explosive performance from the Duke 390, and it also had slightly longer travel suspension, making it more adept to handle touring and bad roads. But when you get it off-road, you quickly realize how inadept it is at it. Well, if you had the skill and you're willing to muscle it around and scream at the red line to get the performance going, you could ride it off-road, but then again, you can take pretty much any bike off-road if you really want to. But this, on the other hand, it feels solid, it feels committed, and it feels really good. And at the 3.68 lakh ex-showroom asking price that KTM demands for this, it's only marginally more expensive than the model it replaces. So for all the extra kit you're getting, for all the extra competency you're getting with this motorcycle, I feel KTM have really knocked it out of the park on this one. As far as the competition is concerned, a comparo is brewing, and we will find out exactly what's what, but I suggest that the competition should be worried. Now that's what I think about the 390 Adventure. What do you think about it? Let us know in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you for watching.